Grace and peace to you. I'm bringing you this message from my home office because we had some trouble last week on our camera and were unable to record the video in our regular services. The message today is about the subject of the missing God in our life. A few minutes ago, we heard a beautiful solo by Walter Hook entitled "Everywhere I Go, God is with Me." Tremendous solo and well sung. However, it causes me to ask the question, do we really believe that? Of course, most of us would say, yes, I believe in God. That's why I'm a Christian. But that's not exactly what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, how much do you believe in that? To what extent do you believe in that? What's the percentage? Do you believe in it like 50% of the time, or do you believe in it like 70% of the time? And more importantly, do you believe it 50%, or do you believe it 60%? Do you believe it instead 100%? Because that's what we're called to believe. We're called to believe in the presence of the Almighty, all-seeing, all-knowing, all-wise God, who is with us 100%. Unfortunately, what I believe is going on in our world today is that we have marginalized God. We've made God much smaller than God really is. And we've kind of taken over the world and let God kind of sit on the sidelines and cheer us on as we take care of the problems and the needs of the world. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not the way Jesus presented it to us, and it's not the way we would hope that we would believe. So today, I want to bring to you a message from the gospel, a message that we find in the 28th chapter of Matthew, verses 16 through 20, where Jesus is appearing to his disciples after his resurrection on the mountaintop where he told them to go. And to those 11 disciples, he says to them, "All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, into all the world and baptize the nations in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and lo, I am with you even to the end of the age." The key verse for me, of course, is that last one, in which the Christ says to us, just like he said to his disciples a long time ago, "Lo, I am with you until the end of the age." Again, as I have said, the question is, do we believe that or not? Are we not like the man in another story that is told, in which Jesus sees that his disciples are having trouble casting out a demon that has caused a young man to be epileptic, and the father is explaining to Jesus that he's tried to get the disciples to help him heal this boy, but they are not able to. And Jesus reprimands him kind of and says, well, all things are possible if you only believe. And that's when the man says something that I think describes a lot of what we're like these days. He says, "Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief." That's where I think we are. Many of us believe in God, and we believe in God's presence in our lives, but we are still not there. We're not to that 100% belief, 100% trust, 100% worshiping of God. And that's what I think is the reason why we have such misery and difficulty and division and disillusionment and destruction in today's world. It's because we've kind of marginalized God, put him on the sidelines. And I think it's time for us to wake up to that, confess it in our own hearts if it's the case with us, and try to move more toward believing in 100% God as opposed to a 60% or 70% God. In the book of Revelations, the angel speaking for God, says to the churches, you are lukewarm. You're neither cold nor are you hot. You're just lukewarm, and therefore I spit you out of my mouth. God is not happy with this lukewarm stage we have found ourselves in. Not content to let us say, well, God is in control of these things and those things, but I am in control of this and that, and we kind of work together as a team. There's nothing in the Old Testament or the New Testament that says anything about a team concept. This is God's universe. This is God's life. This is what God is doing. Everything that we know, see, experience, the circumstances or the situations we come upon, all of that is from the Almighty, all-seeing, all-knowing, all-wise God. And to think that we even have the little tiniest role to play in it all is to minimize God, and we don't need to do that. We need to maximize God in our life, and that's what I want to talk with you a little bit about here today. There's three areas in our life that I think are important for us to maximize our understanding of God. Because when we maximize that understanding, we will have more joy, and we will have more peace, and our world will become more of a place of love. So let me talk with you about each of these. The three are, first of all, the area of evil. Second of all, the issue of death. And last of all, persecution, and what we're going to do about that. Let's begin then with this idea of evil. Today we have a lot of concern about evil in the world. And a lot of people really do believe there is some kind of evil in this world that is attempting to destroy us, that is attempting to take away from us all that which is very important to us. And we believe that that evil is growing larger and larger, and we think that if we don't do something about it, then we're going to vanish from the face of the earth, or we're going to be no more. So a lot of people are trying to get people to wake up to it and to say, oh, look at all this evil out there. There's all this injustice. There's all this messing around with our medical lives. There's all this horribleness that's going on. We must be aware of it. We must think about what we can do to stop it, to get rid of all of it. And we see also how people are choosing their own lives and abandoning the church and abandoning God and not believing in Jesus and not having anything to do with any of that. And so it concerns us as Christians. And many Christians have fallen for this kind of trap of believing that evil might win. Evil might overcome us. And when we are tempted to think that way, then we are tempted to think we've got to do something about it. Obviously, if we don't do something, who will? It's like the old statement, if not us, who? If not now, when? And so we, in various areas of life today, we rally around the cause and decide that we must do what we can do to help God. And especially is that true with regard to trying to overcome the evil in others. We seem to be much more interested in that than the evil in ourselves. And there's a story I would tell you about a woman I had in one of my congregations. Her name was Florence. And she had a boy. His name was Danny. And she called him Danny Boy. And he was the light of her life. But Danny had a rebellious streak about him. And he basically never would conform or confirm or do anything with regard to what his mother wanted him to be or do, and especially when it came to being a Christian. She was a very devout Christian, always came to our services, always was on the prayer team, always engaged in missions. But Danny had his own destiny, he thought. So he became an atheist. He got into drinking alcohol, became an alcoholic, and then eventually that manifested itself in a drug addiction. He got engaged with all kinds of criminal activities, arrested and taken out of prison, arrested and put in prison. And at the current time when I met her, he was in prison for the third time for a much more serious crime than he had ever done before. And he looked like his life was going to be nothing but evil, and that was all he was going to be from then on. But, she didn't give up. She kept coming to the services, especially the prayer night services. She'd pray for him. She'd ask others to pray for him. She'd pray that God would do something to change his life. But it seemed like nothing was happening. And so one day when I was visiting with her in her house, having some tea, she asked me this question. Pastor, do you think God has given up on Danny Boy? And I had to tell her, no, I don't think that at all. Think about it, Florence. I said, who has more power, Danny Boy or God? And who has more time to work on Danny Boy's soul, Danny Boy or God? I said, do you not remember the story of the 99 sheep, the one missing one? You know, remember how Jesus said that the good shepherd leaves the 99 and goes and looks for that lost sheep until he finds it and brings it home. And there's no time limit in this story. We're not told how long it took the shepherd to find that missing sheep. What we're told is that he kept looking until he found that missing sheep. And I told her that's what I believe about Danny Boy. I said, in this world, maybe Danny Boy may continue to resist God all the way to the point of physical death. But that doesn't stop God. God's eternal. And God has all eternity to save the soul of Danny Boy. And I do believe that that's what God wants to do. I do believe he does not want to show up on that final judgment day with only 99 of his sheep. I think he wants to show up with all 100. That's the God I believe in. That's 100% God. And that's what I'm trying to get across here. When it comes to evil in this world, whether it's the evil in our loved ones, evil in ourselves, or evil in the hearts of others, God won't quit working on it until he has completely delivered all of us from every possible evil thing there was. If not now, in eternity he will. So, we don't need to be thinking that we have to help God. What we need to be thinking is we need to watch what God is doing and follow him. We need to understand that God is active and alive in the reality of our life. And whatever horribleness is coming upon us, whatever evil we might see, guess who is destroying it? Guess who is standing against it? God is. And guess who's going to be victorious over it? God is. That's not our job. It's far beyond our pay grade. But the more important thing is that until we believe that God is victorious and will be victorious, then we don't get rid of this burden of trying to live with half a God. So that's one area that I think is very important to think about. And that's the area of evil. We must believe in 100% God, who is 100% victorious over any and all evil all the time. That's what I believe. Let's take now the problem of death. That's another big problem we face. Everybody knows we're going to die, but people kind of hope that that won't happen anytime soon. But it does. We lose loved ones. We eventually lose our own life. Death's a reality. What are we going to think about it? Well, Christianity has presented us with a God that is 100% God and 100% victorious over death. But we tend not to believe that. We tend to believe that God is kind of partially victorious over death. And what I'm saying by that is we believe that God, when he takes our loved ones, he takes them home, takes them to heaven. But there's a separation there. We're here, they're there. And death has separated us from the love that we had for those folks. and for the love we have for God in whom they live. Another story I tell. I call this particular story the Dead Man's Curve. Dead Man's Curve is a way, in Texas at least, we used to refer to those places where the road curves and you can't see what's coming on the other side, so you better not pass on a dead man's curve. But I had a young couple in one of my churches where they went off one weekend to have a great time in the hill country. They drove out there. But when they were going around Dead Man's Curve, they were in their lane, everything was fine, but there was a huge semi-trailer truck on the other side that for some reason they decided to try to pass another car and was now over in their lane on the Dead Man's Curve coming right toward them, hit them, and caused a lot of damage, killed the wife, killed the two children, and put the husband in a coma for many months. I visited with him until he finally came back to consciousness, and I expressed our comfort and our prayers and our hope for peace in his life. But he struggled with that for a long time. He said, you know, Pastor, I know that my family is gone. I know they're in heaven. I know they're in a better place, but I'm so miserable. I don't know what to do. And he tried to get his life going again, but he couldn't. And eventually, I told him about the story of Lazarus and how Christ raised him from the dead and brought him back to his sisters who loved him so much. And I tried to point out in that discussion that grief is what we must do, of course, but we must not grieve like those who have no hope. We must not grieve like those who believe in a 50% God that kind of takes our loved ones and those who died away for us to meet them someday long from now. No, I believe in a God who resurrects not only Christ, but us, and who resurrects those we love. We used to have an expression in our community of Christians called the communion of the saints. Communion of the saints. And what we used to believe is that those who died in the Lord were brought back to us. Very similar to the way in which Jesus was brought back to his disciples. To give us comfort, to give us counsel, to give us leadership, to give us the hope that we were being prepared for a place in the life to come. And at first he didn't catch on to what I was saying, but eventually he did. And he eventually confessed to me that it was one of the most relieving things he finally began to be able to believe. And that was that his family, his wife, and his children were still with him. And he could still know them. And they could encourage him because they were now in the land of light. And he was still in the land of darkness, but he had a bond. And that bond was made possible because he believed in 100% God. It doesn't just leave us stranded on this side of death and say, oh, well, your loved ones are in heaven, don't worry about it. Someday you'll get to see them again. No. The God I know says, here's your loved ones. They're with you. They haven't gone anywhere. They've just changed forms. They're in a different physical form now, a spiritual form. And you can know them and still be with them. And you will always be with them as long as they are in the Lord and you are in the Lord. That's what we say if we believe in 100% God. So that's another area where I think Christians would do well to upgrade their understanding of God. We not only need to do that with regard to evil and whether evil can give us any troubles or not, but we need to do that with regard to death and whether death can give us any troubles or not. And then finally, what I would bring up is the area of persecutions. Now, persecution is an area that is kind of misunderstood in the sense that it's limited to those instances where people are giving us trouble because we're Christians. And they're maybe closing down our church or burning our Bibles or doing whatever. And they think that's persecution. Well, that is a form of persecution. There's no doubt about that. But persecution is a little bit bigger than that. Jesus said, when you're in this world, you will have trouble. And trouble is that persecution. Trouble is what others give us a lot of the time. Not just because we're Christian, but because we are. Because we exist. Persons just sometimes are troublesome. They oppress us. They curse us. They cause hurt to us. They betray us. They do things that hurt us and cause us to get angry or to be offended. There was a philosopher I studied by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre. And he had this play which was called No Exit. And the point of that play was that hell is other people. The misery they bring to us. And what are we going to do about that? How do we see that with regard to our belief in God? Well, what does God say? God, through Christ, said to us that we are to pray for those who persecute us, that we are to love our enemies. Quite a different idea than what we might have, because we tend to believe that we have a right, we have a privilege, we have an entitlement to stand up to those who give us trouble, and to give them trouble, to resist what they're trying to do to us, or to retaliate against what they're trying to do to us, to right the wrong that they are implementing upon us. And we believe we have that freedom and that right and that power, because if we didn't, then we would just be all the time having to forgive people and having to be patient and kind and having not to rise up against those who are doing wrong to us or to others. And that doesn't set well with our human spirit. No, not at all. Well, another story which I call an unwanted beggar. It's a story about another man that was in another church of mine who owned a convenience store. In those days in Austin, we used to call them U-Totem stores. You come in and buy what you want and you tote it off. U-Totem stores. He owned one of those, and they were quite good business. But anyway, he was in our congregation, he and his family. I got to know him because he had teenagers and I was a youth minister, but I got to know that he was a kind of a hard man. He had a temper. He was all the time complaining about what others were doing wrong and how they were not right and how they didn't know what they were talking about. And it seemed to be a dark cloud over his life all the time. Got to deal with all that. But as I knew him over the next 2 or 3 years in that congregation, I saw him change, and it was a miraculous thing to me to see that change. He became slowly, I could see it, but slowly, he became more loving, more patient, more kind, more forgiving toward others. Actually started going on some of our missions out into the areas to help those who were not as fortunate as we were. And so, I was excited about the fact that we were going to have a lay witness retreat that year, and he was going to be one of the speakers to share with us the story of how Christ had changed his life. I was very interested in hearing about that. And he told the story one night as we had our gatherings. And he titled it, An Unwanted Beggar. And the story basically was about the fact that there was this beggar that kept coming to his U-Totem store and sitting outside near the front door, asking people for help financially and blessing them if they gave him something or not, but blessing them. So finally it got to him that he couldn't stand this guy doing that, especially when his customers began to complain about it. So he went out there and told the beggar, you need to move on. This is not a place for you. I don't want you sitting in front of my business anymore. And he expected the beggar to maybe argue with him or to say, no, I have a right to be out here. It's public sidewalk. But instead, the beggar fell down on his knees in front of him and lifted his hands up in prayer. And he began to say to the man, I bless you. I bless you, my friend. God bless you for being the person you are. And it infuriated him that this beggar would bless him and would pray for him. Of all people, it should be the other way around. So I said, get on out of here. But the beggar kept on praying and mumbling something about Jesus and so on and so on. So it angered the man so much, he says, that he took his shoes off and hit the beggar on the head and knocked him back down on the street. He said, you need to get out of here. I'm going to go call the police and they're going to come take you away. But the beggar didn't retaliate, didn't resist. He just kind of gathered himself up, tried to stand up for a moment. He was a little dizzy from being hit in the head. And he said, as he left, the Lord bless you and keep you. And he walked on. The man said that memory just kind of stuck in his mind for months. He couldn't get it out of his mind. Well, it was a season of Lent at that time of the year, and he was studying the scriptures. every day we had a little devotional scripture that they were to study and think upon. And he was reading one that day, not long after this occurred, but that memory was still in his head. And it was a scripture about what Jesus said when the soldiers started pounding the nails into his hands on the cross. He looked at the soldiers, Jesus did, and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Touched his heart when he heard that, and he read that, because he realized that what he did to that beggar was very similar, and that he really didn't know what he had done. He didn't know why he did it. It was just something that angered him, something that made him feel very uncomfortable that this man was taking advantage of his front door to get some kind of handouts from other people. And he began to think about himself. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe this feeling I have of how wrong others are and how they don't understand what they need to do and they don't understand what they ought to be about. Maybe I need to think about myself. And he did. And he began to pray about it. And slowly, he said, it changed his whole life, that experience of the unwanted beggar. He began to realize that it wasn't the evil that was in others that he needed to worry about. It was the selfishness and the hard-heartedness that he himself had. And that wasn't what it meant to be a Christian, to be somebody who brought righteousness into the world against the evilness of all these others. It meant to be a person who forgave, even if someone's nailing nails into your hand or hitting you in the head with their shoe. And so the more he thought about that, the more it began to change who he was. And he explained that that's how Christ came into his life, was through his desire to persecute others and what that meant about him and his soul. So he began to believe in a God that wasn't just someone who said, here's the righteous way to live. Now you go out there and tell everybody who's not living that way that this is not the way to be. No, that's not the God we have, he understood. The God we have is a God of forgiveness, of acceptance, of self-sacrificing love. And he began to think, how much do I believe in that? Do I believe in it 10% of the time, 20%, 30%? He began to understand, I need to believe in that 100% of the time, because that's the God that's with us, and that's the kind of God we have, and that's the kind of God that wants us to be the same way. So if we believe in that kind of God and that kind of love, then do we believe it 100%? Or do we think, well, it applies to these people and those people, but not these people and not that people? No, we need to wake up and understand that it has to do with everyone. And we should pray for all those who persecute us, in whatever way they're persecuting us. And we should love our enemies, not resist them, not retaliate, not do any of that kind of stuff. That's what Jesus did. Think about how he ended up getting crucified. Did he resist it? No. Did he retaliate it? No. He let the crucifixion happen because it was an opportunity to show the greatest love the world's ever seen. It was an opportunity to show the world the love that will heal us all. So there it is, another example of whether we believe in 100% God or less. Do we believe in a God that requires us to forgive certain people certain times? Or do we believe in a God that is 100% forgiving, so therefore we should be 100% forgiving, 100% accepting of all persons, so therefore we should be that way? That's the God we believe in. And when you start believing in that kind of God and realize that you are that kind of God's children, it takes away all this trouble and misery and difficulty and frustration. Oh, you may end up getting crucified, absolutely. You may end up getting killed, absolutely. But your soul will be filled with peace and joy. And that's the whole point of it, is it not? Well, there it is. Those are the three thoughts I have for you today. And in conclusion, I'm thinking about Psalm 23, the 23rd Psalm. It's a very popular psalm. We know it, many of us, by heart. But it kind of summarizes what kind of person we would be if we truly believed in 100% God and not this weak, lesser God that we kind of try to hope is the way it is. If we believe in 100% God, we believe in a God who will lead us in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake, as it says. Yeah, He is doing that, and he will do that, and all evil will be eventually transformed into the paths of righteousness. That's what God's doing. That's his work. And that's what God will do. And either we believe that or we don't. And likewise, it says there that he gives us the comfort of his rod and his staff, even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. 100% God doesn't just leave us on this side of death and then take everything we love and everyone we love over onto the other side, leaving us separated from the love that unifies us all. No, that's not the 100% God I know. The 100% God I know resurrects the spirits of all who die in him and who he brings into himself, and they, through the power of the Spirit, come to us in this life as well as in the life to come. And finally, he prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. We don't go off into a corner someplace and have to eat away from those people that are enemies to us. We don't have to go off and have some kind of life and talk with people that all agree with us and think about all these people over here who are animistic toward us. No, we don't have to live that way. We can sit down at a table with our enemies. Love you, brother. Forgive you, brother. Don't agree with you necessarily, brother, but you're not going to bother me. Whatever it is you need from me, I'll give it to you, because that's the kind of man I am. That's the kind of person I am. I'm not someone who's trying to fight anything, anywhere, in any way. Nor am I trying to resist it or retaliate because of it. I'm just here to have fellowship, to live together in love. That's all I'm here to do. If you don't want to do that, that's your choice. But I want to have that kind of relationship with you. That's the 100% God, and that's the 100% God we need to have in our life today. Think about how much less dissension and how much less disunity and how much less despair we would have if people would just live that way and decide this is much more important, this unity, this fellowship. Because that's the kind of God we have, and that's the kind of race we're meant to be. And I want to be a part of that solution, not part of the trouble. As I said in the sermon on last Sunday, it was Super Bowl Sunday, and the coach of the Cleveland team said before the game that he told his team, unless we believe 100% we are going to win, we will not win. And I thought, that's a good thought. It's a good thought for Christians today, because we don't really believe 100% that God's going to win. We don't believe 100% that God is going to reunite us in death. We don't believe 100% that we need to forgive all and love all. We just don't believe that. We don't believe a portion of it. We believe in a lesser God. And those who believe in a lesser God shall have a lesser life. So I encourage you, I beg you, I hope that you will go back and look at your life and simply ask that question. Everywhere I go, God is with me, but is it a God I believe in 100% or less? Which is it? Amen. Thank you for listening.